Check 1, 2. All right, let's get this show on the road. Good morning, people. Good morning. Awesome to see your smiling faces here. Thank you for coming out. My name is Jeremy. I'm one of the organizers of this event. And so first things first, welcome to World IA Day Pittsburgh. Better yet, welcome Pittsburgh to World IA Day. What started in 2012 as an event with 14 cities now has almost 60 participating across 6 different continents. So just by being here this morning, you are participating in what truly is an international conversation about information architecture. What it is, why it matters, how we practice it and teach it and make it part of what we do. Now, if you ask someone to define information architecture, maybe they'll say something about sitemaps and navigation. Or maybe they'll begin talking about deep linking or linked data and content strategy and taxonomy and ontology and search. You're about as likely to talk about wireframes and information design as you are to get into a deep conversation about meaning and place. But whether or not we call ourselves information architects, whether or not IA is a small part of what you do or it's kind of infused in your practice, I think the reason we're all here, and maybe I'm wrong about this, but I think the reason we're all here is that all of us can agree that we care deeply, right, about making sense of the information that inundates our lives, that inundates the lives of our users and the lives of our communities. So that's what World IA Day is about. It's about coming together for people who have an interest in this, who care about this, that want to connect. And for us, me and my co-organizers who put this event together, planning the first World IA Day in Pittsburgh was very much about just creating an opportunity to connect, for people to connect to each other, to connect to new ideas. And so I just have to say, by standing here, just by being here, we are so happy and grateful to have you here and be part of this event. So thank you very much for that. All right. Right, so like I said, they've been doing World IA Day now for this is the 5th year. It is an event with local flavor, but national and international coordination, run by the Information Architecture Institute. And before I get on to some housekeeping before we introduce our first speakers and get the day rolling, I'm going to share, if this works, a welcome video from them. Let's see. Improvisation. Quick plug for the IAI, if you haven't heard of the Information Architecture Institute. They are a national and international nonprofit volunteer organization. Do check them out and also consider becoming a member. All right, so like I said, housekeeping, and then we'll get rolling. So I'm standing up here, like I said, my name is Jeremy. I am the lead organizer, but I'm not the only organizer. This event would not be possible without my co-organizers, principally standing over there, Carol Smith. Raise your hand, Carol. And Becky Torbachkin in the back, that is Becky. We also have a few other volunteers who are helping out today. If you're a volunteer, if you could, Jackie, stand up, and Brian, raise your hand. And we also have in the back, Karen, and we also have Raylin Musaraka, who's also been helping out with communications. Any of those people, if you need anything during the day, please do not hesitate to ping any of us, all right? So this event would also not be possible without the support of all our various sponsors. We'll be talking more about the global sponsors later, and they have all sorts of giveaways and goodies for you all. I do want to specifically call out our local sponsors and our local partners who have decided to make this event possible and make this event free for everybody, I might add. So Maya Design, sponsoring breakfast this morning. Academy PGH, I'll say a little bit more about them. They're also helping out with the AV and the YouTube live stream. We have some chemistry folks here, great communications agency downtown, great supporter of the local community. And we have our signature sponsor and our host today, UPMC Enterprises. And none of this would especially be possible without them. So I want to give a few minutes to welcome up Rasu, Shrestha, who's the Chief Innovation Officer of UPMC and also the Executive Vice President of UPMC Enterprises, and give the mic to him to welcome you with a few words.
Thank you. Hey, good morning, everyone. Awesome. Thank you for coming to Bakery Square. This is the world headquarters for UPMC Enterprises. I just want to say that. But so a couple of quick words about who we are, but before we do that, just a couple of quick words about the need for design thinking and this compelling need for simplicity in healthcare in particular. Because I'm a radiologist by training, for those of you who don't know me. And as I lead innovation for UPMC, working with the team that I have around me at UPMC, one of the things that strikes us is how complex healthcare is. There was a tweet chat that I had the fortune to participate in my busy day yesterday around lunch. And one of the things that we talked about was the complexity in healthcare and how simplicity should really be embraced in healthcare, right? And one of the ways that we're trying to do that at UPMC Enterprises is really embracing the principles of design thinking. And I said out there that in healthcare, we tend to wrap ourselves in complexity, like it's this comfort blanket. Anytime someone tries to yank it away with some level of innovation, we like pull it back and say, no, don't take my complexity blanket away. And it's true. It's like, we confuse it with better. And it's not better, because at the end of the day, it's about these people, right? It's about all of you. It's about us. And the problem is when every one of these individuals, you and I and everyone else, goes in and gets healthcare, all of their records, all of their data, this is World IA Day, right, is stored away in information silos that aren't talking to each other. They're wrought in bureaucracy. There's a lot of things wrong with healthcare today, and that's part of what we're doing at UPMC Enterprises to change that. So in healthcare, we moved from that in the last decade or two to that. So we've got lots of windows and pop-ups and screens, and today as a clinician, I can tell you on behalf of my other fellow clinicians, we're more detectives than we are clinicians. We're always piecing information together. We're trying to say, all right, when do I have just enough information to make this really life-changing decision for this patient that's on the other side of what I'm looking at? So part of what we're trying to push for at UPMC Enterprises is how do we move from data, because that's where we are in healthcare. We're data-rich and information poor. At UPMC, we have 8.9 petabytes worth of data that continues to double every 18 months. So how do we move from data to information to knowledge, and marry that knowledge with evidence-based guidelines, best practices, clinical protocols, the patients that are in front of you, and move to perhaps the pinnacle, which is wisdom, and in doing so, go from volume, which is where we are, right? It's a volume-based way of practicing healthcare, to value-based healthcare, which is what we're really trying to push for. The way to do that is focus, and that's what we've been trying to do at UPMC Enterprises. So about 7, 8 years ago, we said, look, we've had a rich history, even at that point, at UPMC of investing in the right bets, creating solutions that actually have been commercially successful as well. But a lot of folks would come to us and say, hey, those were lightning strikes. Good luck with doing that again. So we said, all right, let's create a lightning factory. And that's what we did. And this is where you are, is the lightning factory, as we call it, right? So the idea there was, we know where the pain points are. We're a large payer-provider organization that's a composite of small centers and individuals who are really passionate to move the needle in healthcare forward. But as we're looking at all of these different pain points, how do we leverage design thinking principles? So that's something that we really embraced when we set up this organization here a couple of years ago. And then we, and a keen sort of a business acumen to make sure that we're betting on the right pain points, but also moving in the right trajectory so that we can make a real impactful change. So that's Bakery Square. And the name UPMC Enterprises may be new to some of you, because it is. But it's really a culmination of a lot of the great things that we've been doing at UPMC over the last many years. And just very quickly, who we are at UPMC is that we're sort of the commercialization arm for UPMC. We're the guys who look at all these pain points and we say, all right, look, we'll put our money where our mouth is, right? So we're big investors. We go after pain points and say, all right, you know, that's great. Let's not just talk about it. Let's actually do something about it, right? Let's enable innovation in ways that we've probably not thought about before. So we're an incubator, we're an accelerator, we're all of the above and none of the above. In the sense that in addition to putting our money where our mouth is, we also open up the living lab that is UPMC. UPMC Enterprises now is about you know, over 200 full-time employees. A lot of them are designers and engineers, and design thinking is something that we embrace like a blanket here at UPMC Enterprises. And I won't go into this, but we're divided into specific domains because it's important for us to focus. I mentioned the word focus earlier. So whether it's clinical tools or looking at population health, right? So clinical tools being one patient at a time. How do I leverage data to better inform me as I you know, go about my care processes as a clinician? Population health, not just one-on-one, but really thousands, millions of patients at a time and leveraging their data to drive that patient that's on the other side of me. Business services and infrastructure, squeezing waste out of this inefficient delivery of healthcare that we've been so used to in the last many, many decades. And then consumer, right? We're all engaged and we're online and we're downloading apps and we go and see Dr. Google before you come and see Dr. Shrestha, right? So how do we embrace that revolution and really push the some of the discussions beyond disease management to wellness and preventative care? So that's us. We're all about bridge building, as you know, because this is Pittsburgh, and you know, we're proud to sponsor the World IA Day from Pittsburgh, and we're really happy that you're here today. I think design thinking is probably one of the most important movements that we're seeing, especially in healthcare, given how complex the environment is. So thank you to all of you for the passion that you bring, and enjoy the rest of the day.
All right. Again, thank you so much to not just Rasu, but all of the UPMC Enterprises staff for really making this event as smooth as it's been. So, last housekeeping items. If you are the tweeting type, this is the hashtag we're using, World IA Day, WIAD 16, ties us into the global event. So if you go on that hashtag, of course, you'll not just see our tweets, but from Switzerland and Japan. Actually, Japan's probably over. But Switzerland and LA and all the other cities. And we'll also be using the UPMC Innovates hashtag as well. And the final note here is that as a part of the World IA Day international event, we are abiding by the World IA Day Code of Conduct. So in short, what this says is that this is supposed to be an inclusive and welcoming event. So we're not going to tolerate harassment of any kind and make this an experience for everyone, regardless of gender, age, sexual orientation, disability, physical appearance, body size, race, or religion, or lack thereof. So if there's an incident or you feel unsafe or uncomfortable for some reason and you have something you want to report or talk about, please see one of us whenever you're able or comfortable. Carol Smith over there can also be texted directly at her number up there. It's 412-212-8737. Or you can email safety@worldiaday.org if you truly want to remain anonymous and go that route. Okay, so agenda. I'm going to invite Marc up here in a second, our opening keynote. We're going to have a break after Marc, very brief one, and then we're going to have the rest of our morning speakers. Then we're going to break for lunch at noon, have our afternoon speakers, give you some chance to stand up, stretch your legs, have snacks, go outside because we lucked out with the weather and you're all in here. And then we're going to have our closing panel and wrap up. So that is the agenda for the day. Again, a huge thank you. And let me now invite Marc up to set his computer while I say a little something about him. All right. So while he's getting set up, can't tell you how thrilled we are to have Marc here as our opening keynote. Marc Rettig's career spans 35 years in technology, design, education, and strategy. His people-first approach has led him into homes, offices, and streets all over the world. Marc's work is driven by a question: how can we advance the practice of shifting our social patterns? How can we grow our ability to create not only with physical and digital materials, but with social materials as well? Marc and his partner at Fit Associates help leaders, teams, and organizations deepen their creativity and learn to work with story, conversation, relationship, and social systems. So, ladies and gents, I give you Marc Rettig.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Speak into the mic. Right. Remind me, I may forget. So, really nice to be here with you. This is my contact information. I'll do my best to be responsive, and you're welcome to ping me about anything. By way of introduction, I'll say that I wear actually 3 hats. You mentioned Fit Associates. One is my colleague Hannah Duplessis and I teach. We're adjuncts at the Carnegie Mellon School of Design, and this is a picture of the framework that they use to describe their curriculum. And we fit somewhere. Our history is to the left. Like, both of us have been involved with interaction design in the built world and design for service and product. But currently, we are working mostly in support of design for social innovation and transition design. And we also teach in the fall at a program. It's an MFA in design for social innovation at the School of Visual Arts in New York, which is a commute. And then Fit Associates. So that introduction, which I think is written down somewhere. So I'm not going to say a lot about Fit. That point about us. Really, we're working to start with leadership and social questions as opposed to business and technology questions. So yes, business and technology are involved, but we're finding, like, down in the roots and soil of that stuff is how we get along and how we create together and how we engage with systems, especially social systems. We're trying to hone that craft. I think, Jeremy, that I'm here because of point of view, not so much because I'm doing information architecture all day, every day, which is not the case. In about 2009, I deliberately, stood up out of my chair and moved into a different part of the territory from where I had been working. I'd been working in interaction and experience and product strategy and all of that. But I'd been asking, like, how can our work become more systemic and more deeply social? And where I once asked things like, well, how can this medical device, I don't know, be easier to use or fit more into the home or something? We started to ask, well, how can this medical device help people not need the device anymore? And where I might have asked, how can this software give the doctor a clear view of something like a brain MRI? Now we're asking, well, how can this company open its boundaries to include physicians and radiologists and caregivers and patients all the way in its creative process? So it's a different kind of thing. So we already had a definition of information architecture. Some of you may remember when there was almost fistfights about that. So I'm not going to say a lot about it. I mean, some people talk about it as being about categorization and finding and organizing, and some have, I guess, what's called big IA, which is more about the experience. It includes also the experience of information and so on. Well, so for my purposes, for our purposes, when I talk about information architecture in this talk, I'm talking about both. So here's the shape of this talk. The need for a bigger story. Then let's try on a bigger story. Let's give some examples of that story. And then finally we'll come back to, well, what might that say about opportunity and future for information architecture? So something about this perspective shift. You know, I've become fascinated. I guess this leads up to the bigger story question. I become fascinated with the notion of frontiers, the language of frontiers, and there's a powerful notion of a frontier identity. What threshold are we standing on? What doorway are we trying to decide? Do we go through it or not? Yeah. What question is big enough to call us out of our house? Most importantly, what would we be doing if we weren't so afraid? The best frontier questions are the ones that scare you. And I'm finding that with practice, we can learn to not flinch away from the scary questions. We can learn to instead sit with them and understand why they're scary and move into something that might be really profound for our career and for our organizations. So I'm sorry, I'm referring to notes here, and this interface isn't so great. So sometimes I'm going to get distracted by looking down at it. That's why. So another thing, in my current phase of life, you know, I'm tending to look at life through the lens of poetic imagination. And by that, I mean imagining a story or seeing a story that's big enough to help us make sense of all the other stories. So a field like design or information architecture can be this kind of comfortable home that we make for ourselves. And we know who we are, and we know what to do. We're known for our expertise. It feels great. But that same home can be kind of a warm prison if we don't open the windows and doors, if we don't look toward the horizon. So, you know, the world changes outside, and we can become stale if we aren't really paying attention. And so we need this poetic imagination not only to help us make sense of what's going on, but to remind us to move on. And that's one way I talk about frontier identity. And the story, as an example of a big story, kind of poetic imagination scale story that we're all invited into, that could help us make sense of design and information architecture in this time, I'm going to steal from this guy. Meet Rasu Mancini. Some of you may have been to his talk at Carnegie Mellon. He's an Italian designer and design leader. You can look him up and read his bio. His most recent book is called Design When Everybody Designs. So Ezio, his story starts with two observations. One is that we're living in a time when expert design is more and more blending with what he calls diffuse design. So design is not only the domain of the experts anymore. And increasingly, the two are working together. So expert design is supporting, say, community design. And that he calls co-design. So I could, you know, well, let's look at some examples. Frog makes this collective action toolkit. So this is expert design trying to support community design. IDEO.org, they make a HCD toolkit, they make this design for social impact, how-to guide, they're running classes, and these are just two of kind of big name examples. There's a dozen of these things. But it's not, just kind of as a side note, it's not all roses, this. We're kind of early in this story. This is a work from a grad student in South America. And she made this in reaction to the Frog collective action toolkit. Here's the mandate: the right to live in a social design-free environment. She's tired of well, mostly Americans, showing up to do good in our community, and she says, you don't realize that you're bringing all your values with it. You're treating us like consumers. You think you know something about what our culture values. She's upset. And so she made this toolkit, and basically it's for a community use when a social designer shows up in their village. And they can use this kit to take their social designer on a little journey of discovery. And it's wonderful. It's really well written. So we're early in this story, but it's an important story. So let's go back to Ezio. The second premise of Mancini's story is that we're living in a time when multiple crises are just, the debts are all coming due kind of all at once. A lot of stuff is in crisis, and there is tremendous energy for shifting that. There's tremendous energy for shifting the way we live and work to a more sustainable society. We all know this. And both expert design is changing in response to that. It's adding, systemic practices, new practices, and diffuse design is changing. There's just thousands, tens of thousands of people who are kind of going it on their own, not waiting for government or business or the experts to get around to doing something in their community, or actually preferring to do it themselves. So there's this increasing blend, this co-design thing that's happening. Design with, not for, is a phrase we're hearing more and more of. Design soaking into the culture of both organizations and society, more collaboration between organizations, design building ecosystems and collaboratives, and so on. So if you've been paying any attention to what shows up when you open your browser, you're aware of this kind of stuff going on. So here's Ezio telling us the good news. Hundreds of thousands of people are experimenting worldwide new ways of living and doing. This is one example. I'll show you where you can find a lot more. It's not a donkey farm. It's a farm called the Little Donkey Farm. And it's just one example. It is exploring a different relationship between urban and rural in China. So, food safety has been quite an issue in China. And so these folks took it into their own hands, and they're among the first CSA, sort of produce subscriptions in China. And then there's all kinds of community things that they do, lots of back and forth between city and farm that they're trying to enable. And there is a role of expert design. This is an example of co-design because they've worked with professional designers to help them work out the services and to help them communicate well, to help them be seen and understood, and to help them find ways to involve people in what they're doing. So it's an example of a nice collaboration. And if you go DISA's showcase on SlideShare, they've got like 60 of these little 4-slide case studies of these enthusiastic explorations, often assisted by professional designers. And of course, there's scores and scores more that aren't on that site. So I recommend Ezio's video. You can ask Google if I change the slide too fast for you to take a picture of it. But then here's another thing, another part about Ezio's story. His belief is that the road to a sustainable way of life goes through the country of diffuse design and co-design. expert design on its own is not going to save us. We aren't the heroes. Why? Because expert design is disconnected current state from the day-to-day rhythms and routines where these new ways are being lived out, where they're evolving from the pressure of everyday reality, and where they're driven by personal ingenuity and enthusiasm and actual, my mom is sick kind of passion. Unfortunately, expert design is most often holed up in its walls and cubicles, making little ventures out to study. So I think this is a poetic story that is large enough to help us make sense of a frontier. Our crises are finally driving us out of our comfort zones. We're setting out on the road to the country of sustainable ways of life. We don't know what it's going to look like when we get there, but we know we have to get there. And we know that the people living in that country will be us. It's made of us. And the materials of that future are the way we get along, the way we create, the way we get food, the way we raise our kids, care for each other, and so on. So that's a big story for design. It can invite us out the door. So I'd like to tell a couple of stories. I'm going to use some video to get some other people's voices in here. One story is about diffuse design, about what just let us get a glimpse of the enthusiasm and the creativity that's out there outside the halls of professional design. And then the next one, the second story will be about a blend, about the two. Yeah? So here's Jason Roberts. He lives in a section of Dallas called Oak Cliff. And among a whole list of things, he's a founder of an organization called Better Block. And I'm going to, I have some time codes written down. I'm going to play some little sections of his TEDx talk. And let's see how this works. Spinning wheel. Then I'm going to how our sound is. Can't see. Excuse us for a second. Help if we had a different one of these. Check where my sound is going. I'm trying to open system preferences right now. Bing. Smart. Computer is slow. Cool. Yeah, it did a thing. Jason. I do not know why it is so slow. Click and then nothing happens, which is confusing. Okay, let's try now.
abandoned or when boarded take on those buildings. Because now instead of just doing a theater, I got a whole block here that's been abandoned or been boarded up. And when I looked at it, I tried to figure out, well, what's holding this block back? And what I found was, okay, in the 70s, this used to be the streetcar stop as well. They turned it into a one-way street and widened it. They thinned the sidewalks. They created these zoning rules and things like that apparently been on for like 70 years or so that showed, these things that were, basically crippling the potential for this to be the little neighborhood gathering spot. You couldn't do all the things you wanted to do. So I started looking at all the ordinances that weren't allowed, or that were cost prohibitive. Like to put flowers on the sidewalk, it was $1,000, and to do cafe seating was $1,000 times area market value times 85% times 12%. And then we had crowds weren't allowed to gather. You couldn't have awnings and arcades, and it gets really hot in Dallas. It gets hot here too. Use of sidewalks to display merchandise, so we couldn't do fruit stands. We couldn't do all those things. So we looked at this block. I thought, well, obviously, we're not allowed to do any of this stuff that would make this really cool. So what would happen if we tried to break every law we possibly could over a weekend? So we did. We painted our own bike lanes. We brought in cafe seating. We brought in this whole historic lights and things like that. We brought in flowers, and then we started printing up all the rules we were breaking, and we put them on the windows, and we invited the city staff and the council members out and said, come to our party, and they didn't know what we were doing. They're like, oh, this is great, I love this. And then they're like, oh, we're not supposed to be here. But what happened was this became so powerful for the community and then for the city leadership to see this. And they came back and they said, we don't know why these rules have been on the books for so years. We should change these things. So a lot of the issues we're faced with, and I think this happens across the nation, we're basically hamstrung by a series of rules that were put in place years ago that we don't even know why we're doing. We just keep doing it. We created a bunch of pop-up businesses as well in those vacant spaces. We went in and we created a coffee shop. We went into an old garage, and we turned it into a kids' art studio. We created flower markets. What happened after this project, too, was really cool, we didn't expect, was one of the shops became permanent. It was so loved by the community that it's become an art studio. They offer kids classes during the days, at night. They do adult classes, so I can learn how to brew beer and cool things like that. So it's been a fixture. It's now an anchor to the area. This would have never happened. I think the hurdles to starting business now are so high in people's minds. These ideas of I've got to create pro formas, and I've got to get all these long insurances, these permits. It's going to take years. It's going to cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. I'm going to give up. Our idea was hey, let's just do it on a weekend. As a community, we'll help fix the stage. You just do your art, and let us help you. And what we found is when people actually get a chance just to focus on what they love, and the community helps them, it can stay, and they'll figure out all the rest later on. All right, so it worked so well the first time, we thought, well, maybe that was a fluke. Let's try it again. We kept getting told that it's too hot in Dallas and that people won't walk. That's great, you did that in April. So we thought, okay, let's do this in the middle of summer. It was 103 degrees. And I took another block, and again, this is another one of those old streetcar stops. It's 8 blocks over. You see there's no sidewalks on one side, the cars are kind of encroaching, and it's broken up over here. A gas station has broken that historic wall form. There's a pole with nothing on it. There's just random things, so it's really kind of gray and concrete. So we took the street, and we brought 42 trees, and we brought 100 bushes to create pedestrian islands. We got some old pallets, and we made decks. We did the pop-up shops again. We created places for people to linger. We took those poles, and we just put bicycles on it, because remember, now we're the bike part of town. That's what we told everybody. And they believed it. And that's the cool thing is people now are moved to the area because they're like, this is the bike part of town. So it's become a self-fulfilling prophecy. We created our own crosswalks. You're not supposed to do that. But then we went in and we brought in tables and chairs in the parking space and places to linger. And we couldn't get people out of here. That was the problem. It was 100 degrees. And as long as people have a great place that they love, they're going to come out. And you're actually going to have a hard time kind of kicking them out. Okay, so there's a picture I love of the trees coming off the truck. So the way we did this was these trees were scheduled to go to a hotel to be planted. So we just kind of asked with some friends, could we reroute that truck to our block for the weekend and have them fall off the truck? So we did. And this is one of my favorite shots of that block because, in our community we had rendering fatigue. We'd seen all these architects that had sort of these designs of how cool things would be, and they'd plug in trees and they'd Photoshop people. But these are real people; they're not Photoshopped, and these are real bicycles and real trees, and that's a real pole that has something on it now. And this is one of my favorite pictures I saw. I took this of this little boy, and he's walking on this block, and I think he's like, what is that thing? And I'm like, it's a tree. Okay, so we done.
I'm going to pause him there. I don't know, I'm watching my time, but could you just tell me a couple of things that struck you, that stood out, or really pleased you about what you just heard? Yes. Anybody can make a difference. He broke the rules. Rendering fatigue. Not only is he like an example of diffuse design, his experience with professional design made him exhausted. Made the community exhausted. Yes. He didn't ask permission. Yeah. And here, let's see if my slide thing works. So, one follow-up story. So, oh, wait, no, there's another. There's part of that video I want to show just a little bit more. Let's see, time code here. We got to wind up again here. Just a little bit more. 15.
Have everything worked out. So kind of want to step through really what we need to do in order to make things happen, what I found. First of all, first and foremost, show up. If you don't show up, she will. And she's against everything. Yeah. So, and the thing is, nobody shows up. You learn that real fast. It's like 5 or 6 people. It's always the same people. So if you just keep showing up, like that guy keeps showing up, and you're the guy that's saying, I'm going to bring the streetcar back, it's probably going to work because nobody else is doing anything. That also means be present, be there for your community. Figure out a way that you can make things better. We all have skills we can bring to the table. Next thing we found is give it a name. Just naming something. That simple thing creates an identity and builds pride in something. So we created our Art Conspiracy and our Bike Friendly Oak Cliff and Oak Cliff Transit Authority. We made fancy logos. And there was one guy had a cluster of buildings in our community, and he just decided to call them the Bishop Arts District. And it's become kind of the Renaissance turnaround area because everyone's like, wow, we got a place called the Bishop Arts District. So that's why I always tell people, just name whatever it is you're doing. And then lastly, set a date and publish it. And I call it blackmail yourself. This is what I do all the time. I won't even know more than 10% of what we're going to do for a Better Block project, but I have the poster ready, and I've got my friends on board, and then we publish it and say, we're going to do a Better Block, and everyone's like, oh no, we're doing it in 60 days too, so we have to commit. And we always like to do short time frames to commit to these things, because if we don't, we tend to want to back out. We'll talk ourselves out of why we shouldn't do these things or why it's going to be a problem. So I like to get everybody on the hook. So that's it for me, guys. Thank you so much.
And that Bishop's Art District, by the way, I just met a woman who lives in Oak Cliff, and she said, that video was made, I don't remember how many years ago. She said, the Bishop Arts District right now, you should see the place. So the thing is, these activities stick. The guy who owns the property, he's saying like, maybe we'll make money, but in the first 3 to 5 years, I'm going to feed it. I just thought it needed saving. As a sign of his commitment, he provided rent-free for a year space for a police storefront. This was an important element in the area's security and sense of community. That's not normal entrepreneurial thinking, but it is thinking of someone who lives there and wants to make it better. So now that place has 60 shops. We show this video to students as we're helping them become more expert designers. We show them the students because this work is embedded and local. Which is such a contrast with our teams going out to do ethnographic research, and it's connected. It's thoroughly connected to the life of that community, and it's got this playfulness and this eagerness. It's like this leaning in, this kind of like, and it's worth watching that whole video. So that was 2 stories. He's got about 9 more if fit into 18 minutes. It's quite something, this breathless delivery. And it's experimental. So I showed both of those Better Block chapters because, so they did it this one time and people loved it, and one of the shops was loved and took off. And then they go, let's try again. And let's help that shop stay. Let's get them their insurance and their licensing and so on, and let's try again with a different block. This is an actual method for working in systemic complexity. You can't prototype. You don't know what idea to prototype. But you can probe, you can do something and see if it becomes a beneficial and a positive attractor If people love it and what they do when they come is good, then you can stabilize it and feed it. That's a method. Professional designers can learn from that. So I love that, and it's an example of just, as Mancini says, there's thousands and thousands of those things going on right now. But they could use our help. So here's a story about professional and non-professional, professional and community working together, working side by side, which maybe is a story about the trip we might take to a sustainable society. What might a project look like if this collaboration is the way forward? This is a recent project, actually an ongoing project from the Masters in Design for Social Innovation at SVA, and it's called Harlem First, Mapping the Health of a Community. So this is their words. How they're asking, we need to learn, how can social innovation design influence the health of a community, and who should be part of the conversation? So what they did with a bunch of partners is brought together designers, community leaders, residents, data scientists, healthcare professionals to see if they can get to some new story about wellness in Harlem. I don't remember what I was going to say about this picture, but you can look at it. I think I'm going to switch back to notes view. Let me just do that. Because maybe it was something important, you know. Yeah, no notes at all. So, so okay, let's move on. So they started with mapping. So like basically the question that I started with, what's going on? What's going on here? And this is a process through which the citizens in the community participate in the collection of their own data. This is also in contrast with the way a lot of expert IA work is done and a lot of expert research is done. So recording what they view as forces that influence health, as well as the creation of solutions. So among many other things, they made maps. So here's housing in this set of blocks that they chose. There's a lot of churches in the area. People have Jesus but need more places to live. And then this is food stores. There's no really healthy food. So we got data and stories. So they used the students, the professors, did this first exploration and did this kind of mapping. And then the community members layered it with stories and told them where they had it wrong and told them what this data meant. So a principle here is that it's their stories, they get to say what they mean. It's not our analysis process that says what they mean. This is businesses. Here's signage. And it turns out there was a lot of interesting stuff about the messages that were being sent to the community every day about their safety and security and so on. There's that again. So the guiding thesis of this project was to co-create with the community, not for it. So here's community members adding their layers, adding their data and their stories, working together with the professional designers. And I think this is another, I said, well, probe and feed the things that become positive attractors is a principle of systemic design. This is another principle of systemic design, that the meaning comes from the people who own the stories. But experts can bring process and tools and the power to convene. At the end of this chapter of the project, they had a public event, a show, and they had this panel. And it's a lovely, I think I have the link to the video. It's like an hour and 20 minutes long, but I find it compelling. The district attorney of Manhattan was there. A physician and director of departments in a hospital, housing advocate, a guy who's worked for the Clinton administration and the Obama administration, so on. So this clip is extracted from it, and so it's just the physician saying a little bit about his experience, and I don't know how much time, 10:27. When am I supposed to end? No one knows. Good. I'm fine. Excellent. So I'll show a little bit, and the challenge is he's talking shop, but listen through your IA and design lens and think about what the opportunities you're hearing and what it might take to pursue them.
Over the last 4 years, I've learned an immense amount working with community health workers, people from the community who are trained to motivate the people around them, to help improve their ability to set goals and achieve them in ways that improve their health, improve their life. And in many ways, I learned that there's a two-way street between how healthcare is designed and delivered from the perspective of a physician and how it's received and interpreted on the side of my neighbors in Harlem. And through that process, as I started to shift to Mount Sinai Health System, in the context of a unprecedented dynamic healthcare environment, where in New York State alone, the state is spending $8 billion to redesign how it cares for low-income New Yorkers, in participation with about 200 community organizations in Upper Manhattan and across the city. I realized that we really needed a way to make sure that this input and the perspective that you see when you talk to a patient, when you speak with your neighbor, doesn't stay just in their minds. We actually find ways to scale that up so that there's actually a design interaction that helps us think together in more constructive ways about how do we build not healthcare systems, but healthy communities. And in many ways, that means that even as a technical expert, we have to kind of recognize that we have limits, and a lot of the people around us have those solutions. It's both a really exciting place to be. It's also incredibly humbling, in part because, as Cheryl mentioned, there's no industry that's able to solve complex social challenges alone. And as I look to my colleagues that lead housing institutions or lead institutions that are at the head of the safety of of New Yorkers, I think every one of us grapples with the fact that you can't do this alone. And so we're always looking for ways to design better and to design in larger foras. And it's been incredibly exciting, and it's been really fortunate for us over the last year and a few years to start to learn the methods to give voice to start a map, and start to interact at a much more constructive level with the communities that we say that we're serving. Thing in there. And I think in some ways, medicine as a system, instead of at the doctor level, but at a system level, is starting to ask itself, if you listen to a community, it'll tell you what it needs. And that really echoes what you've said, Carmen. And so what does that mean practically? It means practically, even today, as I was reviewing some of our workflows internally, it means the type of questions that we ask people: are you hungry? Do you feel safe? Do you feel like you have some place to go after this visit? Those become primary questions in how a health system interacts with the community to make sure that it is healthy. And that's something that we're starting to do now. And the third element is that it's not simply a matter of a transaction happening in between a healthcare system and a community. It's what Rob mentioned, and what Clyde has helped me set up over the last 3 years, is ways to actually involve people in the work, that organizing principle, which makes part of your work to make a healthier neighborhood through community health workers or otherwise. So you've got to listen, you've got to actually start asking the right questions, and then you've got to actually change the work. And until we start doing those three things, we'll still see this amazing kind of disconnect. But I think that these sort of conversations, the listening part, the mapping part, is starting to at least get into step one and move us down that path.
And now we got it. Having a real conversation about how that we might be changed and how we might need to change based on what we. And he's talking about reflection, not analysis. Yeah. So in general, and I sort of say this work is different, and we've noticed ways that we need to add to our kit. One is that the work is systemic, and so our methods need to become more, that we can't just think about individuals and hope to shift a social pattern, yeah? Whether it's in an organization or out in the world. That we need to add the tools of participatory work to our, also by systemic, let me also mention, it's who's there, who's included. It's not just that our methods embrace a systemic view and systemic creation. It's that we include the people who are living it as peers, not as customers and not as research subjects, but as creators on the team. And that's the participatory part. A method of actually going through the project where the community is the team. Members of the company start locally and then spread out and work with not only planning and design, but also adding the methods of emergence. Factors being one example. And this is another one I like to grouch about, you know. This thing of sitting in our cubicles away from them instead of getting out there and becoming a we, like this full-on high-touch human aspect of these examples, I think has to be in our future. Has to be in our future. And it's not always comfortable, but it is satisfying. Okay, what about information architecture? Oh, yeah. For me, this raises questions. What is systemic IA? What's participatory IA? That mapping example is one clue, you know, one example. what is IA with and for local community? By local community, I don't just mean neighborhoods. You know, if you work, well, UPMC, how many local communities are inside UPMC? Executive suite is a community. What is like full-on, greasy, sweaty, human IA? And so I can offer some invitations, and I'm curious, you know, would be curious to hear what excites you. I don't have clear answers, but I want to use another model, use a framework to maybe give us some invitations. I think shifting patterns, which is what this journey is about, can use some help from design and IA. This is a story of a model called the Berkana model of how in living systems, in natural systems, and in social systems, a kind of a dominant paradigm gets replaced by another one. And it starts, well, as a system is born. It thrives and grows and then reaches its apex, at which point it begins to decay. At the same time, some people begin to question the old system and jump off, and we call them pioneers. Pioneers start out as solo players, but soon connect to others to form networks. Meanwhile, of course, this dominant system they left behind is still in place, still playing out. The networks evolve into communities of practice, joining their efforts in common purpose. Eventually, those communities of practice become the new system of influence, and the old system starts to decay. And as the new system grows, it builds bridges back to the old system to assist people in crossing into the new. That's that like fact? Well, no, it's a model, but it's a model that you can apply to a lot of things. Like it sort of maps to a lot of different situations, including, you know, the post-consumer story or the post-oil story, or shift from play with it a lot. So this is a sketch of it that one of our students at SVA made, and it's labeled. Now, the Berkana folks use these square labels to drive their work. They say, oh, well, we want to affect this situation. Let's see if I can identify where it is in this story. Should we be helping networks form? Should we be nurturing communities of practice? Should we be inviting pioneers? Like, what would be our work in this? I think IA could look at that way too. IA could help people consider the choice of becoming a pioneer by showing them pictures of the current system and its risks. Yeah, and it could help people get a view. A lot of times you can't see the early pioneers, but design and IA can shine a light on them and make them help them be more visible. When it comes to connecting, you can help the pioneers find each other. We could help them interconnect their efforts and form like real hard-working relationships, yeah? We could help them disseminate language and practice. When it comes to communities of practice, for all our Facebooks and get all their names. I keep getting invited to more. We're still not really good at this community of practice thing, where it's not just, with network, is people are the information kind of, and who they are is the data. But now they're getting together to make together, to share practice, to share knowledge, to make a pool, and IA. I think there's like some nice opportunity to support this, and we're in a time when a lot of these are trying to get born. Yeah? So helping networks become communities of practice. those are some, I mean, we could, now this could be a real conversation. I'll say that thinking about design in IA, we have the potential to develop some superpowers story. One is to help groups and systems see what's really going on. So that Harlem project is an example. That the community mapped, the experts maps, together they made sense of it all. In this exhibit, they're like, this is a wall of the services available in the neighborhood. So seeing it that way, instead of when you walk around on the street, helps you see what's going on, yeah? And it's physical, by the way, not only digital. It wasn't only a digital map of signs and communications, it was also a physical map. Now you can stand in front of that as a group and have a conversation and move things around and jam sticky notes on it, right? This is an exhibit of noise pollution and decibel levels in the neighborhood, which is a health factor. So that's one superpower, help people see what's going on. Another is to help people use information and story together. This is story. There's these guys, Cognitive Edge, are really helping us move forward with systemic practices. And they have a tool called SenseMaker. This is a group in Africa that used it to understand the life of girls, and I think in this case it was Ethiopia. So here's an example. So what they did was they went out and got a lot of stories, hundreds of stories. And the stories had some metadata with them. You know, well, how old are you? And, you know, where was this? And so on. But now you can get plots. So every dot in there is a story. And if you pick one, in this story, a girl's obedient but vulnerable, both, about equally. What's going on? So here's a story about her parents. She's 14. Her parents, unbeknownst to her, had arranged a marriage. And we're hiding it from her. We're going to spring a marriage on her. And her friends got wind of it. So, you know, and we can do things like this. The point of this is that when we have both numbers by themselves have credibility, but not life and emotion. And stories by themselves have life and emotion, but not always credibility. Together can be compelling, and they let us have a new kind of goal. How do we get more stories like this and fewer stories like that? Now we can start probing and experimenting, yeah? And then finally give people Legos for their own good, IA. There's a story here about this kind of like Harlem, a guy getting people in Africa to collect data about trash in their city. But what they found was it didn't work very well because we have non-professional data collection. So they have this whole new area of practice now, which is making it possible for a community to collect much harder than doing it yourself. Wrap-up note. So I'm going to end with just a personal note. I have been fooling with these questions and involved with these questions for about 6 years, and it started as a frontier. It's becoming more like my home, but it's meant that I've encountered some interior frontiers, movements in myself. I see myself in relation to the world, and I thought I would close with them in case they resonate at all with you. One is to recover the depth of the creative process. I went through a lot of my career being mostly driven by intellectual curiosity. And that is bottomlessly interesting. But it can be kind of a small, kind of an isolating chamber. And if intellectual curiosity alone may not be enough by itself to produce work that's alive. So I invite you to look at Hugh Dubberly's PDF poster of the creative process, where he a lot of study of creative processes from all sorts of fields. He points out that when we observe, it's through conversations. When we reflect, reflection is conversational with ourselves and with what we've seen when we observe. And making is a conversation with tools and materials and our own reflections and the people around us. And it also requires openness. What I mean by recovering the depth of the creative process is to remember that we can go through the creative process and not be changed. And the quality of the result depends on the quality of our attention. Another movement is to let go of control and sit within uncertainty. We really get uncomfortable when we can't happen, but it's a fundamental to this kind of work that I'm talking about, that we can't control it. And it is quite a school for me. The time that it requires for something to show up. And lastly, remember the importance of my own depth of being and recover wonder and reverence. I'm having to learn, if you're going to have that full contact kind of work, kind of creativity, you're going to work alongside people instead of be done. That's a different stance, and I've had to have some, and I'll close with this quote from John O'Donoghue, our most tragically dead Irish poet, to say why I use that word reverence. At the heart of things is a secret law of balance, and when our approach is respectful, sensitive, and worthy, gifts of healing, challenge, and creativity open to us. Gracious approach is the key that unlocks the treasure of encounter. The way we are present to each other is frequently superficial. We become more interested in connection rather than communion. In many areas of our lives, the rich potential of friendship and love remains out of our reach because we push towards connection. When we deaden our own depths, we cannot strike a resonance in those we meet or in the work we do. When we deaden our own depths, we cannot strike a resonance in those we meet. Reverence of approach awakens depth and enables us to be truly present where we are. When we approach with reverence, great things decide to approach us. Our real life comes to the surface, and its light awakens the concealed beauty. When we walk on the earth with reverence, beauty will decide to trust us. The rushed heart and the arrogant mind lack the gentleness and patience to enter that embrace. Beauty is mysterious, a slow presence who waits for the ready, expectant heart.
All right, thank you to Marc. Earlier I said we were here for connection, but after that quote I have to take that back. We're here for communion and reverence and stillness in the groundlessness. All right, so here's what we're going to do. We're running a little behind, but that's okay. We got buffer time. We'll improvise, right? So let's take a 5-minute break, stretch out. There's still more food. The coffee guy just brewed more coffee. We'll come back in 5. We'll resume our morning talks. Just a quick note, again, bathrooms are down back that way.